Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us all together safely this morning. We have an opportunity this morning to celebrate the freedoms that we have because we are blessed enough to be born and live in this great country of ours. And we just ask that you lift up that celebration, bless our time together, bless this food and this community, and we pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Now I'm going to ask Troop 890 is going to come up and present us with our colors and lead us in our pledge this morning.
Color guard, advance. Color guard, halt. Color guard, prepare to post the colors. Scout salute. Color guard, post the colors. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to the American flag. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
2. Color guard reform. Bow face. Color guard return to post. Color guard halt. Bowed face. Color guard at ease, troop at ease.
Awesome way to kick off our morning. We're going to get going here. Do we have any guests in the audience today? Mr. Boyd?
I brought two, so I brought half the team Boyd with me. Lucy, she's in 5th grade, and she's excited she'll be joining the girls' side of the troop in February. And then Silas, my 3rd grader, who is a bear cub. Both are into America and are excited to hear Mr. Holley.
Welcome. Any other guests here this morning? Mr. Gray, you have an announcement to make?
Good morning. For years and years, the Exchange Club, along with the 100 Women's of Lake Highlands and the KC, have put together something called Packs for Lake Highlands. What we do is we raise money. We put together a big grocery bag full of food, and what we do is we contribute that to a school in Lake Highlands. We've rotated different schools in the past, and what we try to do is provide food for every student in that school. It's a huge effort. We've done a great job year after year, and we'd like to do that again. So that's always been a partnership between the Exchange Club, the 100 Women's, and the KC Club. All three of us were doing that, and I was always the Lake Highlands representative. This year, the 100 Women have taken kind of a backseat. Their main roles were communication, fundraising. We were there for the donation portion of it, and the logistics. So this year, the 100 Women's have wanted to take more of a backseat role in it and just provide basically contributing money, but not so much of some of the other parts. So I'm not a great communicator, so I haven't done a very good job of putting it out. So today's the day that I'm just kind of letting everyone know. So what we typically do is we meet on, we'll meet this Wednesday, this upcoming Wednesday. We'll meet at Stoltz Elementary. It's going to be a little different than what we've done in the past. Typically it's in here. We have to then load it onto a truck. We have to then drive it to the school. We have to unpack it. It's a ton of work. We had a ton of volunteer, just so much effort. So what we're going to do this year is we're actually going to go to the school that we're giving it to, so we can see the school, so we can be a part of it. Some of the teachers are going to help. Just a little bit more interactive and way less amount of energy and effort that goes into moving stuff around. So what we're going to do this year is meet at Stoltz Elementary. The actual pack portion starts around 5 o'clock. I'll be up there around 3 or so. So if anyone would like to help, we don't need to show up here in the middle of the day like we did last time to get things ready. We're just going to do it all right then and there. And so if anyone is willing or has time this Wednesday and would like to go up to Stoltz Elementary to help us pack, to help unload, whatever we need, I would greatly appreciate it. As far as the volunteers, the people that are packing, the 100 women, or no, I'm sorry, the YMSL, Boys League, and then the Girls League, NCL, has offered to help quite a bit. So they're going to have volunteers. The moms are going to show up to help with that too. But we will always need volunteers. So if you guys would like to join and help us on Wednesday, that would be fantastic. And then we're just going to go ahead and distribute everything that night. We don't have to follow up the next day and bring it to the school because obviously it's already there. So the work part is one function. The fundraising, I hate asking people for money, so we're also kind of kicking that off as well. It takes a significant sum to make this happen. I went ahead and put flyers out. There's a QR code. If you get a chance to scan it, there's several options there of what you guys can donate. Anything will help. We're also going to send out a massive email campaign. That's the fundraising effort will be over around Thanksgiving. We like to, for people to contribute as soon as possible, just so we know what the numbers are. But we're going to leave it open until Thanksgiving this year instead of stopping it early. So plenty of time to contribute money to it. So if you guys can spread the word, I'll go ahead and send out an email today. If we can, we'll distribute to everyone else. If you guys don't mind, out to your friends or family. It's a great thing. It's great for the kids. The schools greatly appreciate it, and I know Stoltz will as well. I've already been in contact with them. So any help on Wednesday, any financial help would be appreciated. Thanks.
It's a great time of year to consider giving, and PAX is definitely a great opportunity to help out those in our community who don't have the things that most of the people in this room are blessed with. So please consider that. Any other announcements from the floor? No? All right, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Holmes to introduce our speaker this morning.
Thank you, President Volkman. Appreciate the introduction. Good morning, Lake Highlands. Hope everybody's doing well this morning. We're enjoying the change in temps. I know my leads are telling me it's time to get the rake out. Glad to be with you here today on Veterans Day, presenting our One Nation Under God program. I'd like to first stop and pause and thank the troop from 890 for presenting our colors this morning. Lots of familiar faces in that troop from way back in the day when we were doing Cub Scouts. So always a pleasure to see y'all here at the KC and the way the boys are growing up and doing such amazing things for the community. Also, before I start, could I have our veterans that might be here in the audience today please stand and be recognized on Veterans Day? All right. Mr. Hall? Well, thank y'all. As y'all know, today is Veterans Day, and traditionally the Exchange Club of Lake Highlands has hosted our One Nation Under God program on Veterans Day for a couple of reasons of which I'll go into. As we know, Veterans Day is the anniversary of World War I, held on November 11th, to honor U.S. veterans and victims of all wars. This holiday is a celebration to honor America's veterans for their patriotism, love of country, and willingness to serve and sacrifice for our freedom and the common good. And some of the history behind Veterans Day: the armistice between the Allied nations and Germany came into existence on the 11th hour of the 11th day, the 11th month of 1918. And on November 11th, 1919, Armistice Day was commemorated for the first time ever. President Wilson declared that this day should be filled with solemn pride in the heroism for those who died in the country's service and with gratitude for the victory. In 1926, U.S. Congress officially declared the end of World War I and said that the anniversary of the armistice would be commemorated with Thanksgiving and prayer. Then in 1938, an act which was made the holiday legal on November 11th of each year was known as Armistice Day. And the day was initially intended to honor veterans of World War I. And then a few years later, World War II required the most significant mobilization of service members in the history of the United States. And then later, American forces were sent to fight in Korea. In 1954, the Veterans Service Organization asked Congress to change the word armistice to veterans. Congress made this change, and on June 1st, 1954, November 11th became the day to pay tribute to all American veterans, wherever and whenever they had served. So that brings me to today in our program, One Nation Under God. The One Nation Under God project was adopted on July 30th, 1964. The exchange leaders at that time wanted to heighten awareness of our rich religious heritage. It's observed in November nationally as One Nation Under God Month, and it's that time of year when exchange-ites join together to increase public appreciation of the important roles both religious faith and freedom have played in our nation's history. Our club, Exchange Club of Lake Highlands, has taken that role of freedom of One Nation Under God Month and paired it with Veterans Day as a way to show our appreciation for our veterans, for the freedoms we enjoy, and raise awareness around veterans issues. Which brings us to our speaker today. I think we can all agree that Stephen Holley, that there's no person that has his boots on the ground with veterans issues locally more than him. And so when it comes to raising awareness around veterans issues, I was very excited to be able to reach out to carry the load and have him come speak to us today. For those that are unaware of Carry the Load, I would say where you've been, but as we all know, Carry the Load is an amazing organization providing opportunities for veterans to continue to serve their community, and also create opportunities for Americans such as myself to connect with the true meaning of Memorial Day, and also as a way to honor veterans in the way they've served our country. Our nation's heroes have served our country. So that brings me to Stephen Holley, for those that don't know Mr. Holley. Stephen is currently serving as a development partner at Stillwater Capital, where he is responsible for all industrial developments. He is also the co-founder of the founder of the commerce site, Six Site, which is a hunting and sports apparel company, to which my wife has always replied, how much camo do you really need? Stephen graduated from the United States Naval Academy in 2000 with a Bachelor of Science in Economics. He graduated Basic Underwater Demolition, SEAL Class 234, and served as SEAL officer at SEAL Team 5 based in Coronado, California for 5 years, and completed 4 deployments to Iraq and Southeast Asia. Stephen has served the Dallas community as a member of the Touchdown Club, the Elizabeth Toone Charities, as a board member for the Goodwill Industries of Dallas, and as the chairman of Pete Sessions Service Academy Advisory Board for the 32nd Congressional District. He has been recognized by the Dallas Business Journal through the 40 Under 40 Award and has received the Dallas Foundation's Good Works Under 40 Award. Stephen has also, while doing all that, has continued to be a Dallas leader in co-founding Carry the Load, which he founded with a Navy SEAL of his, and serves as president and CEO. So at this time, members and guests, I'm honored to be able to introduce Lake Highlands' own Stephen Holley.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you all for having me this morning. It's nice to be able to drive only about 2 minutes to a 7 a.m. speaking engagement. Like Mark said, I grew up here in Lake Highlands, graduated in '96. It's a lot of fun for me to be back in the neighborhood, to see obviously a lot of familiar faces in here, and be raising a family in this community. Feel very blessed. I'm going to just talk a little bit about my service, some of the places I went, my transition, and ultimately, as Mark indicated, spent a lot of my time with Carry the Load throughout the year as a volunteer CEO and a member of that executive board, and hopefully leave a little bit of time here at the end if there's any questions. So when I was at Lake Highlands, military really wasn't on my radar. I had an older sister that married a guy right after he graduated from the Naval Academy when I was in 9th grade. And I kind of saw everything that, they dated for a while prior to that, and I kind of saw what the service academy life was like, and I thought, that's not what I really want to go do. And it was through a recruiting trip to go play football up there where ultimately, getting on the plane coming home, I thought, as an 18-year-old kid, the opportunities that institution would afford and a free education, I just couldn't, something I couldn't pass up. And it was the best decision, I ever made. Went up there, played football for 4 years. And through that same brother-in-law who was stationed as a surface warfare officer out in San Diego, had gotten to know a number of his friends who were, had gone to the academy with him, who were in the SEAL teams. And so over my 4-year period at Navy, that was something that I just kind of gravitated toward and was lucky enough through about a 2-year process, my junior and senior year, to get an opportunity to go through that training. Reported to Coronado in October of 2000, and if you've ever seen the Discovery Channel, Buzz Class 234, you've had the opportunity to see me get my backside handed to me quite a bit throughout that 8-month period. But we started with 118 guys in October of 2000. We graduated in May of 2001 with 18 of those guys. And I could go pretty deep into that training, but ultimately, the biggest takeaway from that training, and ultimately what they're trying to instill into you as you get ready to go to a SEAL team, is that it's not about you, it's about the guy that's to the right, to the left of you. And through a lot of physical pain and some pretty intense mental games that they play with you, you learn, the guys that are successful at that training learn to kind of get out of themselves and forget about whatever physical and mental issues you're going into. And if you can pour in the guy to the right or left of you, for me at least, a lot of that physical pain throughout that training would subside. And that really was the light bulb moment for me during Hell Week. We were about 2.5 days into what's about a 5.5 day ordeal where you don't sleep, and it's pretty intense. And there was a guy in my boat crew who went on to have a very successful career in the SEAL teams. And he was actually my swim buddy, and he was the guy who, when I was not feeling my best, and I never really thought about quitting, but I thought, man, I might just die out here. But when I was feeling really, really bad, feeling sorry for myself, candidly, Jeff was the guy that I always leaned on. And at some point in that training, selfishly, I was feeling pretty bad, or during Hell Week, I was feeling pretty low. So I was leaning on Jeff, and Jeff was an absolute stud. And at one point, I could tell that he was not right. And that selfishly worried me, because I thought, man, if Jeff gets rolled out of here medically, then what am I going to, how am I going to finish this week? Well, ultimately, what we found out was that Jeff, for me, I started pouring into Jeff because, again, selfishly, I thought if he can't make it, how am I going to make it? Well, when I started pouring into Jeff, like I said, kind of my stuff I was dealing with kind of went to the back of my mind. But ultimately what I learned was Jeff ran for 2 days on a broken tibia. It was in the context of Hell Week, you're in boat crews, you got 5 or 6 guys that are competing against other boat crews, and Jeff did not want to let the other 5 of us down, because if he got rolled out, it's not like they put another guy. Now we're 5 guys competing against 6 guys in other crews. And so Jeff literally ran for 2 days on a broken leg. And at that point in training, I realized that that's what it was all about, being able to get outside of yourself and sacrifice for the individuals on each side of you. So we ultimately graduated. I went to jump school at Fort Benning. I like to tell people who are in the Army that that Army static line jump school. They take about 3 weeks to teach what most people can learn in about 3 or 4 days. And went back to advanced training in August of '01 and was in the land warfare section of that training when 9/11 happened. And within 60 days, November the 1st, I checked into SEAL Team 5 and it was a ghost town. Everyone had been kind of pre-staged and forward deployed in the preparation for ultimately was the invasion of, not the invasion, but going into Afghanistan in early 2002. My first 2 deployments were in Southeast Asia and the Philippines, and spent a lot of time there working with other coalition forces, most notably the Philippine SEALs, and we were targeting and specifically trying to find one guy over there who was the leader of an Al-Qaeda affiliate in that part of the world called the Abu Sayyaf group. And spent the better part of 2 deployments literally tracking one individual who ultimately was successfully captured by a group from SEAL Team 7 after we left over there. My last 2 deployments were in Iraq in '04 and '05. And it was a very interesting time in '04, very early on in that conflict. You know, if you remember, we went into Iraq in the spring of '03. You know, the Ba'ath Party was quickly disassembled, and what we call those former regime elements of the Ba'ath Party we thought were largely defeated. That Iraqi army was disbanded, which ultimately we know now was a mistake to completely disband that army. But towards the end of '04, we thought, all right, this thing's wrapping up. We're having these elections, at the end of '03, we're having these elections in 2000, I guess those were in '05. But when I got over there in '04, it was before we were really using the term IED. We didn't have any armor on our vehicles, and you could tell that, again, those former regime elements were defeated, but there was this undercurrent, and we didn't really know it at the time, but it was Al-Qaeda, it was sponsored foreign fighters from Iran and Lebanon and all over that part of the world that were pouring in there to fight the United States. And so the technologies and the tactics and the techniques that they were using at the time, it was over about the next 2 or 3 year period, is a very interesting time because it was just a chess match. Again, we didn't have armor. They started using a lot of IEDs. We got armor, and then they would use a different type of, they started introducing these electromagnetic pulse induced IEDs that again, could go through any armor that we had. And so ultimately it was what started as kind of rudimentary tactics from not very well organized foreign fighters. Over about a 2 year period, became very apparent that we were fighting a very well capitalized, very well educated, very well funded force that was, again, in large part being funded by Iran and Hezbollah. So over that period, again, '04, my primary mission, as it relates to the group I was with, we were doing what's called capture kill missions, direct action missions. We would kind of develop our own intelligence, and I hearken it to kind of what FBI or the law enforcement does today. You tap into a criminal organization, and amongst that spider web, you're just trying to work your way up the hierarchy. And so we didn't have our own intelligence gathering. We had our own intelligence gathering, but we had to very quickly, because of the amount of foreign fighters that were over there and Al-Qaeda organizations that were kind of interspersed and interlocked with these organizations, we had to figure out pretty quick, internal to the SEAL teams, how we develop our own intelligence. And so we set up detention centers where, instead of handing over our prisoners to other groups to to interrogate, get follow-on information. We kind of grew that capability in-house very quickly, so that literally we weren't dependent on any other intelligence organizations in order to go get our follow-on target. So very interesting time over that deployment. But again, when I left in 2004, we were again kind of not making it up as we go, but adapting very quickly. We were taking metal, 1/4 inch and 3/8 inch metal sheets and welding them to our Humvees. Again, we didn't have armor at the time because IEDs were just starting to gain prominence and just starting to really be an issue for coalition forces over there. I came home from that deployment and actually got married in the spring of 2004, and we went right back over there less than a year later in 2005. In 2005, they just had the first elections. I don't know if you remember, in January, February of that year, a lot of footage around those Iraqis leaving polling stations with, they would dip their thumbs in that purple ink as their kind of certification for having voted. And what our government didn't realize at the time was those newly elected officials of that government, there was a prime minister, there was a Sunni, a Shia, and a Kurdish vice presidents, and some other members within those cabinets. What we didn't realize was their internal security forces that they had working for them were largely, again, in that part of the world, your family, your tribe comes way before your country. And so a lot of those internal security forces were made up of these individuals' families and their tribes, and their level of training and their expertise, we found out, was woefully inadequate, because pretty soon those foreign fighters started targeting, killing members of their family, kidnapping them, extortion, blackmail. And so for a newly elected democratic government, I always tell people, well, I'll tell you this story, but a very fragile time for these newly elected leaders in the midst of what was a civil war in their country, and every other state-sponsored terrorism pouring forces and money, and they're trying to destabilize that government. And so at that period of time, Donald Rumsfeld made the decision that they were going to put a SEAL platoon to guard every member of the top 6 of that government. And you think of it was a Secret Service mission, essentially, and something we had no training on, but very quickly we kind of figured out how to go about that. So when I got over there in 2005, my first 3 months, we were assigned to the Sunni vice president, and there were 16 of us, and we lived at his house with him, and we had a member of our platoon and as you can imagine, world leaders, heads of state from across the world were coming in there, in and out of Iraq. We were flying with the Sunni vice president across the globe as they were trying to set up this government. But we had a member in every single meeting that took place. And so being a fly on the wall in some of those meetings and seeing what was the discussion, the interaction among these heads of state, and really just the challenges that government had to overcome amidst a ton of chaos in that early part of 2005, 2006, and again, pretty much in the midst of the civil war between the Sunnis and the Shias, and the instability that was being fostered by ultimately Al Qaeda and those other foreign fighters. But very, very interesting time. The latter half of that deployment, we went out to a base in between Fallujah and Ramadi, and were tasked with training up a group of Iraqi army soldiers and giving them special operations capabilities, so that ultimately, at that point in time, big difference between 2004 and 2005, they said you cannot, as a SEAL platoon, you cannot go out and execute a mission unless you have a certain percentage of Iraqi soldiers with you. And so the run-of-the-mill Iraqi Army soldier was not, obviously did not have the capability to go out and operate with us on a daily basis. So we took a group of their best, and we would train them up during the day, and literally at night we'd go out, and it was kind of on-the-job training for them. So that was also a very interesting time. But out there again, going after what we call high-value targets, folks within those, you know, that Al Qaeda organization. In the midst of that deployment, I left on that deployment, I think it was in April of '04. I called my wife, Molly, who was, you know, we were newlywed at the time. I called her in May of '04, about a month being gone, and she told me she was pregnant. And so literally the day before, my CO back in San Diego had called me and said, hey, we want to give you a good buddy of mine had just rolled off an deployment. He'd been shot, and he been shot in the arm and hand, and it wasn't, he wasn't rehabilitating as quickly as they thought. And they said, hey, do you want to take this platoon right when you get back? And my answer was absolutely. Literally the next day she called and said, we're pregnant, and that changed the priorities pretty quickly. So I called my CO back and I said, you maybe kind of have a week to think about this, and thought a lot about it, prayed a lot about it. Ultimately made the decision to get out of the Navy, got off active duty, came back here in '06, went to work for the Staubach company at the time on the office brokerage business, and ultimately spent 8 years there. But it was in the midst of, you know, 2007, 2008, 2009, and, you know, I didn't even use the word transition at that point in time, but there was I had people tell me as I was getting out that it'll be an interesting kind of few years for you, and of course being, you know, 10 feet tall and bulletproof, wearing that uniform, I didn't think too much of it, but ultimately it was a very interesting transition for me. And a big part of it for me was the guys, really the West Coast SEAL platoons and teams that I've been operating with in and out of Iraq from, you know, '03, '04, '05, and into early '06. We had not lost one SEAL in that conflict. We had a lot of guys shot, a number of guys blown up, hurt pretty bad, but we hadn't had anyone killed. And so for me, that calculus of getting out was, you know, we're gonna, you know, this thing's gonna keep going, but you know, these guys are doing fine, and again, leaving some good friends behind. But what really messed me up was in fall of '06, we started losing guys in Iraq. A couple fall of '06, a good friend of mine in '07, and so a lot of guilt for me in that transition, amongst some other issues. But ultimately, for me, going back to carry the load, that being able to start that organization again, starting it from a place of pain, you know, Memorial Day coming around, and not a whole lot of observance of, you know, why we really have that holiday. And so Clint and I, who served together, you know, put on this event where we could go out and tell the story of good friends of ours that we've lost. And ultimately, what started with, you know, 400 or 500 people at White Rock Lake in 2011, coming off our 12th year, we were in 48 different states in the month of May. I think we've raised north of $38 million in the last 12 years. And that money that we raise goes back to other nonprofits that are supporting, you know, military veterans, law enforcement, fire and rescue, and their families across a very broad continuum. Whether it's housing assistance, job assistance, mental health, physical health. We support some very unconventional recreational therapies that are really, really cool. But we've got, this year I think we had close to 50 nonprofit partners, again, other nonprofits that are spread across the country that go through a process to be partners with us. But all that's to say is Carry the Load for me was really the turning point in the transition where, you know, like the folks sitting in this room, you're here because you want to serve your community. For me, I wanted to have an outlet to continue to serve, the men and women that are on the front lines for us daily, whether they're overseas or whether they're here at home. So, I go back to that decision to get out of the Navy was a hard one, but ultimately, I know it was the right decision. I got 5 wonderful kids, a phenomenal family, and live just a few blocks away. So that's kind of my story in a large nutshell. And I think we've got a few minutes for question and answers. I know you guys want to be out of here by 8 o'clock. So are there any questions? Yes, sir.
Two-part question. Looking here in Dallas, what do you see as some of the largest veteran issues here in Dallas? And what can a group like us help do about it?
That's a great question. It's a tough question. I think what I've learned over the last 12 years being in kind of this veteran service organization space and learning about, the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of groups out there that are serving in some capacity. What I'll tell you is, what I think our organization, Carry the Load, has done very, very well, and it's a testament to our executive director and our staff and the absolute army of volunteers that we have both locally and nationally. But that is creating, I think a lot of times in the nonprofit world, you can get a little bit of, don't put, this is my pie, and don't put your finger in my pie. I think we've done a good job of bringing organizations together that, again, going back to the word I use, continuum. Every veteran's transition is different based on, where they served, what they did. And so no one organization can be all things, can be the cure-all for whatever those issues are. And it's very important for organizations to collaborate along that spectrum, because the ones that are doing it the best are best in class at a particular service that, after this issue has been resolved or worked on, guess what? There's another one across that continuum that's going to need help as well. And so, that's a very long answer to a short question, but I would tell you that there's not one single answer, because everyone's experience is different and everyone has different set of circumstances when they get out. And so that's why I think the word collaboration is so important amongst those groups that are serving in that space. Yes, sir.
I'm sure this is a basic question, but when we hear the term a deployment or a tour or something, what does that actually mean, and how long, and what determines that?
It depends whether you're in the Marine Corps, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force. In the Navy, in the SEAL teams in particular, typically a training cycle was you'd have 6 months going to, in a 24-month cycle. 6 months of it, you'd have individual schools where we'd send guys to sniper schools, or we'd go to free fall school, or communication, or a lot of the individual schools to get qualifications. You would move into then a platoon level, 6 months of platoon level training, where your platoon would travel the country, doing land warfare in Arkansas, or urban warfare at Fort Knox. From there, you would go into what's called a unit level training, where you would get all the other platoons that you were going to deploy with. You'd get your ideally you'd get your air assets that you were going to deploy with. You'd get your intelligence assets. You'd get all the complementary things that a SEAL task group would deploy with overseas, and you would start working together as a task group that would ultimately culminate in a training exercise over 3 or 4 weeks that would certify you, okay, you guys are good to go overseas. And then a typical deployment was 6 months. But post 9/11, with everything that was going on, Iraq, Afghanistan, 6 months was not the norm. you know, normally it would get stretched to 7, 8, 9, and it was a very dynamic time, but typically in the Navy, 6 months is a deployment. But it also can depend on what's going on and the needs, and they can certainly get stretched, as a couple of ours did.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
First, thanks for your service. And the question is around, we're operating off of this volunteer service, the mentality, I want to go serve, whether it's police, whether it's the military branches. Everyone seems to be coming up short of what they believe their target should be and needs to be. What kinds of things, from your perspective with the history you have, what's causing that, and what can be done to change that so that more people seek that out?
Okay, just so I'm clear, when you say coming up short as it relates to.
Well, they say recruiting numbers, whether it's we need more policemen and can't get them, we need more people in the military and can't get them.
Well, again, I don't want to get political. I would tell you domestically, just my opinion, I think a lot of what you see recruiting-wise, shortage-wise, as it relates to law enforcement, with no law enforcement experience, I would tell you, you know, what's happened over the last, 2.5, 3 years in our country. Some great things have happened, some other things that I think a lot of sentiment around anti-law enforcement certainly has a direct effect there on those recruiting numbers. As it relates to the military, I'm not in it day to day, I can't speak to it. What I can speak to is from 2007 till 2018, when Pete Sessions was defeated by Colin Allred. Prior to that, I was on his, what's called his Service Academy nomination board. And I would tell you that the 32nd district in the United States, and Pete had a very well thought out process vetting these kids to go to service academies. But I would tell you, it's probably one of the most competitive districts in the U.S. You know, when you think about St. Mark's, ESD, Highland Park, in the caliber of kids that would apply every year. But when I applied to the Naval Academy back in 1995, 96, roughly there was, 10,000 applicants for 1,200 positions. You fast forward, I want to say 2000, and it started happening in 08, 9, 10, 11, but ultimately there was 20,000 kids trying to get 1,200 spots in the midst of two wars that had been going on a long time. You would think it would be the opposite. So I can't speak to the overall military, but I can speak to that experience here locally, seeing the numbers of kids that wanted to go serve their country in the midst of two very, very long conflicts, on a very, very steep trajectory that I don't think anyone anticipated. So, again, I don't think I answered your question directly.
It was in the news and people wanted to go serve. Maybe the patriotism piece was more out front.
I think so.
And
also,
maybe not now. It isn't as much or something.
I think that's the challenge for us as a country going forward as we come out of these two conflicts. Keeping the needs of these service members that are transitioning at the forefront of our thought, because as we know now, again, back when I was going through, I'll never forget, I flew home in 2004 from Iraq, got on a plane there, I was in San Diego within 20 hours, walked off the plane into an apartment, into a condo that I had bought that my fiance at the time had set up, and going from, that environment in Iraq to being a engaged to-be husband in that environment, it was not good. And what the Navy learned was, we got to give these guys some decompression time. And now they do a great job with, they'll take them to Germany or somewhere on the way home for a week and kind of do some processing, some therapy, let them decompress quite a bit. But anyway.
Yeah, thank you.
Justin.
So curious about heard, certainly recent studies, kind of the number of our homeless citizens, not just in Dallas, but around the country that are actually veterans. And so I'm curious, obviously, to get to that point, there's a lot of challenges in their continuum that they encounter to get to that point. I'm just curious as kind of your interaction with, organizations that are engaged with, homeless veterans.
So, over the past 12 years, we have partnered with Austin Street downtown. I'm sure a lot of you guys know Daniel Roby here in the neighborhood who runs Austin Street. But we started partnering with Austin Street because of the number of homeless vets that they found themselves serving, day in and day out. And this is a deeper conversation, with, it's gonna take a lot longer than a minute, but I think that, I think there's a variety of reasons for that, and a lot of that has to do with pride. A lot of that has to do with, again, speaking from experience, some dark times that I had when you feel too prideful to ask for help, and you start isolating, and isolation can be a spiral that's pretty hard to bring yourself out of. But I think, in my opinion, I think that has